is Delilah Marvelle. Is she here? Delilah, there she comes. Delilah spent her youth studying various languages, reading voraciously, and playing the pianoforte. Wow. She confesses that here ends the extent of her gentle breeding. She was a naughty child who was forever torturing her parents with countless adventures that they did not deem respectable. Confined to her room on many occasions due to these misadventures, she discovered the quill and its amazing power. Soon, to the dismay of her parents, she rather enjoyed being confined to her room and finished writing her first historical romance, which was at a heart-stopping 800 pages long. Wow. At the age of 14. Delilah is the winner of the Reviewer's Choice Award for Best Historical Romance of the Year and was voted Booklist Top 10 Romances of 2012. Welcome, Delilah.
Thank you so much for coming out. My name is Delilah Marvelle, and I write historical romance. For many of you who have never actually picked up a historical romance, you have no idea what you're missing out on. I do a lot of research, probably as much or more research than any historical fiction author will put basically sitting down. I take my research very, very seriously. My current series, just finished up, is the Rumor series, and this is New York City 1830 and London 1830. And I traveled to New York City 3 times to dig through the archives and even try to find a building that was left in New York City that I could touch from that era. Sadly, well, there was one, but it was covered up in 1970s stucco. You really didn't get a feel for it. Sadly, a lot of the buildings in my era, the 1820s and 30s, were all made out of wood structures. So obviously things then started getting replaced with brick and stone. So a lot of them never survived. What started me off on this series was a random newspaper clippet. What? Oh, you can't see me. Okay. Heaven forbid. And having done a lot of research, I was going through old newspaper articles and found one, and it was actually about 30 years after I had set my series, about a gentleman who had been missing for 30 years and reappeared to his family. So meaning at the age of 10, he had disappeared and reappeared 30 years later. And they didn't go into what business was, and it started cranking the wheels in my head as to what could have happened to this 10-year-old boy that he disappeared for 30 years and then reappears to be who he is. And so through the series, these are like puzzle pieces. So the first one, Forever and a Day, you're introduced in a very oddball sort of way to the happenings of what links all the books together, which is this missing 10-year-old heir. The first one, the hero, you meet him on the street through the heroine's eyes, and he does something very heroic and rescues her purse from being stolen, but in the process gets hit by a hackney, and his memory's wiped. And I try to give something different and unique to the experience of where the reader is actually experiencing what the character is at the same time. And so his memory, I wipe his memory. What better way in which he has to rediscover who he really is right along with the reader. And all he remembers is all the books he's ever read, and he thinks it's part of his life. And so you won't know, and I won't give away, who he is and how he links to the series until he actually regains his memory. But I did want to read a snippet of basically when he, I apologize for not having this marked ahead of time. Okay, and I should say that I apologize. Okay. At the beginning of each chapter, I include books that the hero would have actually read in 1830. And I try to include books that people that you might have never even heard of or read. So I dug around and did a lot of research on books that I haven't even had a chance to read. To me, that they were just utterly fascinating. To endeavor to forget anyone is a certain way of thinking of nothing else. Jean de la Bruyere, Les Catares, 1688. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because it's a very long chapter, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the part in which she gets her purse snatched. And then we transition to his point of view. A quick movement shadowed the corner of her eye as a youth darted in and yanked back her wrist with a violent tug of her own reticule. The glint of a blade whizzed past. Her eyes widened as she jerked around, realizing that the strings on her reticule had been slit by a passing thief. Hey! Georgia pounced for it, trying to reclaim what was hers, but the lanky youth skid out of reach, shoving past people and dashed out of sight. Her heart popped, realizing she'd just been robbed by a 10-year-old. Hiking up her skirts above her ankle boots, she sprinted after him, shoving herself through those around her. "You'd best run," she shouted after the boy, trying to keep up, "because I'm about to shuck you like an oyster." "I'll anchor him," the Brit called out from behind. His broad frame sped past and dodged left and then right, then left again, disappearing into the bustle of Broadway. Having lost sight of him and the boy, Georgia passed to frantically ask others if they had seen a youth being chased by a gent in a dove-gray hat. She was repeatedly pointed onward and downward, so onward and downward she went. Dragging in breath, she tried to keep up with the pace of her own booted feet as the jogging facade of Broadway shops tapered into pristine Italian row houses. If she didn't get that reticule back, she'd have to dig out money out of her box to make the rent, again. Shouts and a gathering crowd of men on the upcoming dirt road made her jerk to a halt and snap her gaze toward a pluming dust that was settling. An overturned dove-gray top hat lay oddly displaced outside the crowd in the middle of the street. She sucked in a breath, scanning the men who were yelling at the women to stand back. What? The driver of an omnibus, who had already brought his horses to a full halt, untied the calling rope from his ankle boot, hopped down from the box seat, and hurried into the crowd as the passengers within the Omni craned and gaped through the small windows. Oh, God. Her stomach clenched as she scrambled forward. The Brit had been struck by the Omni and was laying motionless there on the street corner of Howard and Broadway. And now we shift to his point of view. Light edged in through the waving darkness and pulsed against his eyelids. Slowly opening his eyes, he squinted against the glaring brightness of the sun that pierced through a cloudless sky. Taking in several jagged breaths, he drifted, unable to lift his head from the dirt-pounded street that dug into his shaven cheek and throbbing temple. Several booted feet and countless hovering faces blocked his skewed view of painted placards posted on buildings and a blue sky that rose beyond a street he did not recognize. Shouts boomed all around him, and the dust-ridden, heat-laced air made it difficult for him to breathe. A bearded man with a cap slung low against his brow leaned over him. "Good to see you stayed below the clouds, sir. Are you able to get up?" Why were there so many people gathered around him? What was going on? He rolled onto his back, wincing against the searing razor-like sensations coiling through the length of his body. He staggered to sit up, only to sway and stumble back against the road beneath him. The scuffed imprint of a booted foot that had been pressed deeply into the dirt beside him drew his gaze. And this is where we come into where he gets snippets of memories of books he's read. I'm wondering if anybody can recognize the snippet I'm about to read. I will give you a free book. So this is the snippet that's coming to his mind. "One day it happened that going to my boat, I saw the print of a man's naked foot on the shore, very evident on the sand as the toes, heels, and every part of it." Can anybody tell me? Well, you got it right. Fantastic, except a lot of people said it at the same time. So if we can agree as to who said it first, I will give you that book. It was Robinson Crusoe. He winced, pushing the odd, misplaced voice out of his head. His vision blurred as the acrid taste of blood coated his mouth and tongue. Something trickled down the side of his face, its wet warmth dribbling toward his earlobe. He swiped the moisture away with a trembling hand and glanced toward it. The fingertips of his brown leather glove were smeared with blood. "Hoist him up," a female voice insisted. From within a blur of surrounding faces, there was a pause. "Oh, saints preserve us." She sounded more panicked. "We need to get him over to the hospital." He swallowed and glanced up toward that lilting female voice that appeared concerned for him. Was he in some strange part of Ireland? Despite trying to find that voice, there only seemed to be an endless blur of male faces floating around him. Hands slid beneath his morning coat and trouser-clad thighs. A group of men jerked him upward in a unified grunt. Pain whizzed straight through his clenched teeth and skull. He gasped, twisting against their pinching grasp. "Gentlemen," he seethed out between ragged breaths, "whilst your concern is appreciated, I hardly think a full procession is necessary." "Such posh manners for one who is dying," one of the men carrying him playfully hooted. "One can only wonder what will come out of his mouth when he's dead." A quick hand reached out and knocked the cap off the man's head. "Less tongue, more muscle. Move!" "Hey," the man yelled back, stumbling against him and all the others carrying him. "Keep that mammoth little hands to yourself, woman. I was only having a bit of fun. You think it's fun watching a man bleed? Keep moving, you lout, lest I make you bleed." That freckled face of a young woman with the brightest set of green eyes he'd ever seen suddenly peered in from all the broad shoulders carrying him. Her rusty arched brows came together as she trotted alongside him, trying to hold his gaze through moving limbs. "Where are you staying?" She shoved the loose strand of hair back into her bonnet with a bare hand, trying to keep up with the men carrying him. "Close? Far?" Gritting his teeth, he tried to focus but couldn't. "Are you from around here?" she insisted. "Or are you visiting from abroad? You mentioned a hotel. Which hotel are you staying at?" "Hotel?" he echoed up at her. "When did I mention a hotel?" She squinted down at him, searching his face. "Never you mind that. We need to contact your family." "I'll run myself over to them if you give me a name and address." "Family?" he blinked, glancing over the swaying, hazy blue sky above him. Countless names and faces flipped through his mind's eye like the pages of an endless book. There were so many names. Strada, Ludicrous, Caspericus, Bruyere, Horace, Sloane, Lovelace, Shakespeare, Fielding, Pinkelton, Lacroix. They couldn't all be related to him. Or could they? "I was called Robinson Krustenhauer, which, not being easily pronounced in the English tongue, we are commonly known by the name of Crusoe." Wait, Crusoe, yes. It was a name he remembered very well. Robinson Crusoe of York. Was that not him? It had to be, and yet he couldn't remember if it was him or not. Oh God, what was happening to him? Why couldn't he remember? And so he goes through half the book thinking he's Robinson Crusoe. So that's the first book, and then you'll find how the first book is related to the second book. The second book, the entire series is Gangs of New York meets My Fair Lady. And I had an absolutely fantastic time. If any of you had a chance to see Copper, BBC, they ripped off my series. They even have a one-eyed boxing hero. So I'm joking, of course. With all the research that I've done and with all the research they've done, it's the same flavor and the same feel of it, and I really enjoyed bringing it to life. Yeah, and the last one that comes that just came out is Forever Lord, and this is The Hero's a Boxer. I did a lot on bare knuckle boxing. I put together, actually, if you guys are interested, if you go to my website, DelilahMarvelle.com, I have a book trailer that I put together in which I did a lot of research. Mark, will you please stand up for a second? My husband, Mark, I have to introduce him. The reason being is because this man, bless his heart, trained for months and got himself buff in order to play the hero in my boxing trailer. Only a husband would do that for his wife. He had to take off his shirt for his wife. It was very lovely. But I had to learn a lot, and I'm almost done here, but I really did want to share my experience in researching bare knuckle boxing. It's so different from the boxing of today. The men were different, and the rules were different. So prior to 1860, the Queensberry rules were introduced. Prior to that, you literally had very few rules. You had 7 rules, and anything went. If you think of the wild wrestling of today, that's kind of similar to that. As long as you didn't hit below the waist, anything goes. If you wanted to hold on to somebody's hair, you held on to somebody's hair, which is why long hair fell out of popularity with boxing guys after the 1700s. One boxer in particular got the pulp beaten out of him when his opponent grabbed hold of his ponytail and held onto it while he beat him to a pulp. So things started changing, and how they would think about it. Then they didn't have the understanding of they didn't have the understanding of the body that we have today. So the men would train. Most of them were lower class or middle class, and they would train on trees, and they would quite literally knock the bark off the tree. And so that tree would help them. That was their sandbag, so to speak. And I really enjoyed researching how they did boxing back in the day. So that said, I pass on to the next person, and thank you very much. And if you do purchase a copy of my book, I do have, for the first 5 people, I have a free copy of a book to offer you up. Thank you so much.